All right, welcome everybody to the Thursday, July 20th, 2017 Earth 335A continuity meeting of Kubernetes SIG service catalog. We're going to continue designing talking through design issues related to moving catalog to beta. Doug, you want to share your screen?
I'd rather not, but okay, hold on a sec.
Someone else can share their screen.
Hold on. Give me a minute. All right, can you see that?
I can see it.
Is it big enough? Okay, cool.
All right. So the first thing on the agenda today is to talk about migrating the settings API group and the PodPreset resource into Service Catalog API server and implementing the PodPreset behaviors with an initializer. So in case anybody watching or attending might not be clear on what this means, the PodPreset resource and settings API group are currently in the core. They do not really fit what the core is supposed to be. And the reason that they're in the core anyway is that at the time that we began developing them, we did not have a lot of the mechanisms that catalog has become, or is one of the impetus for developing, like the API aggregator, the generic resource support in kubectl, that the catalog resources use to do rich describes without information actually being in kubectl about the resource. And we most importantly lacked initializers, which are a mechanism to do admission control type activities without compiling code in Kubernetes. So this is sort of a classic chicken and egg problem in Kubernetes where we want a set of machinery, but we don't have it, and so we have to use kind of the best tools that we have at the time. And we have a good opportunity now to implement this particular thing in the way that we wanted to when we started working on it. So before I say more, I'd like to open the floor for other people's thoughts.
Is there any reason that we're moving it to Service Catalog other than we're the main user of it right now? Because it makes it very uncomfortable to move it to our group, because it feels like if it's part of our group, then we should have the freedom to pretty much do whatever we want with it. And that's going to make it so it's no longer a generic resource available for anybody's use.
So there's a few different concerns bound up there. Let me address them in what I think is reverse order. If we move the settings API group to our API server, that it doesn't mean that not anybody can use it. It means that you have to install the catalog to use it. I think that the motivation for moving it to our API server is that PodPreset was basically conceived to solve the problem of injecting binding information for catalog. I think there are other uses for it, and I don't think moving it to our API server prohibits you from using it for other uses. As for doing whatever we want with it, I'm not exactly sure what the concern is. Can you elaborate a little bit on it?
Well, let's say we decide to move it to Service Catalog, and we decide PodPreset needs to have some tweak to it that makes it a little less generic and more specific to Service Catalog. I think that's a fair thing for us to do because it's part of our domain at that point. It's under our API server, right? Whereas if we keep it somehow under the core, then we can't necessarily make it specific to one group like Service Catalog, right? It has to remain a generic purpose resource. And so I think there's a big decision here, right? Is it really meant to be a generic resource? Because if it is, then it really should not be part of our group. Maybe it should be part of a more generic utility group, not part of core, but I don't think it should be part of Service Catalog at that point.
I I would have to know an example of something that you're thinking of.
Well, okay, let's say we take PodPreset and we decide, you know what, there's no reason to have PodPreset and PodPreset binding. We're going to merge the two. And we're just going to make the link to the instance access key, or whatever we decide to call it, optional. That way, yeah, you don't have to use it, so you can still use it in a generic sense, but there's a pointer to the key if we need it. And that's not maybe a service catalog specific. That is not necessarily a decision we would make if it was part of core.
Yeah, I don't think that we'd want to do that anyway. I think that we should look at this like it's being incubated in our repository, but it's potentially not going to permanently live there. I know that's the outlook that Brian Grant has on it. I think that this would be like a convenient place to incubate it. I don't think it long-term necessarily lives in Service Catalog, and I do think that we should avoid entangling PodPreset functionality with the catalog, except via a resource that links the two.
So if we move it here, are you proposing that we would, well, actually, you're not necessarily proposing it, but are you saying that we could put it under a different API group? That way it can be easily moved to someplace else, but not have to be a resource naming change?
Yeah, so specifically what I would, what I imagine as the transformation would be to move the entire settings API group to our API server and retain it as a distinct API group. And that way we could relocate it in another API server at another time, and add a new controller to our controller manager that acts as the endpoint that the initializer talks to in the core.
You said the settings API group, was that created just because of PodPreset? What else is in there? I'm not familiar.
It's only PodPreset.
Okay. Now, are you actually proposing that we do that? Because part of me is also wondering whether we have to make this decision before beta or whether it can happen after beta.
I think that it would be, so let me put it this way. The desire is to bring PodPreset to beta in 1.8. I think that Google is willing to staff the effort to move it to our repository, and they have a person Sunil who's been on some of our meetings, who is tasked with bringing it to beta and doing the programming work. Does that fully answer your question? I'm not sure I remembered all of it.
No, I'm just trying to figure out whether we need to do this now or whether we can do it after Service Catalog beta.
Yeah, I don't think they're necessarily causally linked. I think the preference would be to get it out of the core as soon as possible, but I don't have, we don't have everybody present who has an opinion about the subject. It should be in the core or not here. I guess my own preference would be if we're going to do this, that we should do it sooner rather than later, because it would be minimally disruptive to the Kubernetes release to do that.
So Morgan in the chat has written some very useful things. Morgan, would you mind verbalizing them?
Yeah, it's PodPreset, as you know, I'm just going by how I understand the API server stuff. If it's the same API group, it doesn't matter which server serves it, just that it gets served under the specific API group.
Yes, that is correct.
That's with the caveat that everything's behind the aggregator.
Yep.
And you know, that all works. Never would we put this in Service Catalog because it's not ours, or at least it's not. We want it to be generic.
You mean the Service Catalog API group?
service catalog API group.
Yep, agree.
I don't particularly want it in the same server, the same repo, but whatever, fine.
Right. The big thing here, though, is people will, in order to get this, have to deploy service catalog, even if they don't want service catalog.
Yep. Plus, I think we should be emphasizing the fungibility, the modularity of the API servers by making more of them.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from, Morgan. I do definitely think that one of the motivations for putting it into ours is that it is an additional operational load to have to package and deploy yet another binary.
Too bad.
All right, noted.
It's an image. It's an image, and you run it, and you Helm install the thing, and it's installed and it's running. And if it's too difficult to do that with one, and then it's too difficult to do it with two, why would we expect anybody to ever do this? So if it's too much of a load, then we need to stop right now and just give up on the whole concept.
Well, I doubt that's an option.
Agreed.
So our goal, first and foremost, sounds like it's to get pod presets out of core. Okay, so that's number one. Does anyone disagree with that with respect to this particular topic?
I don't know that it's our goal. It is a goal of Kubernetes to move it out of the core. I've realized since we started talking about this that we don't have Sunil or anybody else who is working on this actually present today, and so I wonder if we might want to cut the discussion off here and table this for the SIG meeting for Monday.
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's do that and talk about it later and understand I still don't understand why, so let's get into that.
Doug, do you mind putting an action item there to reschedule this for Monday? And Paul, would you mind getting Sunil involved, get him to show up and all that?
Yeah. I think he was expecting to talk about it on Monday, and I stuck it in the wrong place on the agenda. Oops.
Perfect.
How do you spell Sunil? Just some.
Sunil. He usually pronounces it Sunil, but I've also heard the same name pronounced as Sunil. And then, Doug, I think you have the next agenda item.
Yes, but technically, someone else had it on there. I just think of my name next to it. The question here is, do we want to remove the restriction on the GUID check for external ID and replace the validation that makes sure it's a GUID and replace it with just basically nothing? Say it has to be a non-empty string. And this is being driven by the fact that the Open Source Broker API spec defines this as a string. It recommends it as a GUID, but doesn't mandate it be a GUID. So therefore, some brokers out there today do stick some funky characters in there. And so I'm personally in favor of doing this because I think that would make us more spec compliant since the spec allows any non-empty string.
I find the spec to be quite frustrating in this regard about this specific field because I am suspicious of anything that says it's just a string because, like, for example, would we allow an ID that is solely composed of non-breaking space characters, or I'm sorry, the zero width space? Does everybody know what I'm talking about? There's a space character.
Well, there's a zero width non-breaking space, and there's a zero width breaking space. So you're going to have to be more specific.
Yeah.
So
either one of those.
So let me. Why don't I make a suggestion here? We will never be breaking backward compatibility by making something more permissive in the future. That's the first point. And the second, more peanut gallery style comment I want to make is I've gone back and forth in my own head about this quite a bit, whether to just allow a string to just come in and deal with it as such, as an opaque string, or whether to stay strict. Because allowing being more permissive with the string later on is never going to break backward compatibility, but the vice versa is not true. I feel like it would be more wise for us now to add a little bit of permissivity, but not take any opaque string. And then if we find a significant number of brokers that pass in zero width non-breaking spaces or emojis or whatever else, we can evaluate those on a case-by-case basis. And concurrently, right now, we can try to go add language into the spec that makes that better specified.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Aaron that I'd prefer to relax it gradually as we have case-by-case issues, and use that to eventually feed back into the spec that we do think it's actually this regular expression.
So Doug, I wanted to clarify the sentence you're writing right now. I don't want to add more restrictions to the current ones. I want to relax the restrictions a little bit to account for the, I think this one is to specifically to allow a dot. So I would like to add permissivity to allow the dot, but not go all the way and just take any string.
So I'm a little confused by that. So I'm all for us driving something in the spec immediately to say, you know, maybe this should just be a GUID, but the spec is very clear that this just needs to be a globally unique identifier. And if we're saying we're going to relax for this character and then this character and then this character, it's going to be a huge pain in the ass. Whereas the spec is very clear. Why are we making choices that are outside of that?
I tend to agree, and that's my concern is if we deploy this thing into a product and then some broker comes along and says, hey, I'm going to add a backslash character in there, or something like that, right? The guys who deployed this are now basically screwed, and they have to wait for us to apply a fix to it when everything is spec compliant today.
So last I read, the spec doesn't say it must be a GUID. Do I have this wrong?
No, it just says a string, and we recommend being a GUID. So my question is, why are we relaxing it just for the dot character and not saying we're just going to conform to the spec and allow any string? Because
I think we should assume that our drive to make the spec more restrictive will win. Because I don't think we should ever, in any system we build, I don't think we should ever say this is just an opaque string, unless it's user input data.
Right, but that's the spec right now. And are we really just going to make up our own spec?
No, we're not going to make up our own spec.
We've already found something that doesn't work with our scenario, so we have to allow dots. So exactly what Doug said. Somebody else is going to have a hyphen or a slash or something else that we can support, and we're going to have to open it up to that and open it up to something else. There is no spec that we're trying to conform to. So I'd rather us either leave it as a GUID and try to drive that in the spec, or conform with the spec and try to get the spec changed. And when the spec changes, we make it more restrictive.
So let's say that the spec does change, Brendan. Let's say we get into the spec language that says it must be a GUID. I think we will. I think we have a very good argument for making it required as a GUID or required as some well-formed string. If we currently were to allow any string, it would be much, much more difficult to go back and start requiring a GUID than to take what we have now and make it more permissive.
I would assume that spec change would involve a service broker version change. And so the new brokers would be conforming to the new version, and we would, have we talked about supporting multiple service broker API spec versions?
Yeah, absolutely.
It seems like
that's not going to happen for a long time, and I don't think that a single GUID change would ever be representative of the scope of a change or set of changes that would warrant a version change.
Okay,
So
well,
I don't think.
all I'm saying right now is that what we're deciding is to not support compliant brokers. And I'll leave it at that.
Guys,
That's
I
fair.
don't think that we can use any string as a Kubernetes identifier.
That's not what this is. This is not a Kubernetes identifier. This is not used by Kubernetes at all. It is simply echoed back to the broker. And I completely agree with what Brandon is saying here. We need to be spec compliant. The spec does not restrict the string at all. And by us not allowing basically any string in there, we're not going to be compliant. And Aaron, as much as I would like to agree with you, I don't think we can assume the spec is going to change on this, because it's going to require a version change to get this change into the spec. And they're not prepared, or the group is not prepared to make a version change over this kind of thing.
Is the external ID being returned by broker?
Yeah.
Why does? Okay, so that's why broker cares about the format of external ID. I thought that is a client-side generated thing. Okay.
Yeah.
I would say this.
So I actually don't think that the issue, sorry, not to talk over you, but I actually don't think the...
He did mean to talk over you. You know that,
not to
right?
talk over you either, Doug. I don't think that the issue of whether this is an identifier is actually put to bed yet. We have a lingering issue of whether we'll address services or service classes and plans by their names, which I think can change, or their IDs, which are supposed to be static. Does anybody remember that?
That's a different, well, I remember that issue, but I don't think it's necessarily something we need to discuss in this.
I do think it is, because if you can send a space for this, then we can't use it as an identifier. So we're locking ourselves. We're essentially sorting out that other design issue at this time too, if we decide that we are going to allow characters that won't make a valid Kubernetes identifier.
I don't think these external IDs, though, appear anywhere in the Kubernetes user interface. So because the issue that you're talking about there are the names, right?
Yeah.
That come back from the
I'm
broker.
not talking about the UI though. I'm talking about in etcd. So as I understand it, this ID is the only stable coordinate that we actually have for a service or a plan. And that means that we have to validate those things as valid names in Kubernetes if we're going to use that as the name of the object, which is something that we talked about doing, because we don't support name changes.
Okay, we can include it, but to be honest, I would much rather say if we want to not be spec compliant, then let's try to get the spec changed first and see how that discussion goes. And if they want to change the spec and they're willing to not have to bump up the versions, then that's great. Then every life is good. But if they come back and say, no, we can't do that without making it a breaking change, then we're stuck. And I think we have to be spec compliant.
So Doug, you and Brendan, you guys both have, I don't dispute this, you guys both have a super excellent point, right? That we're not spec compliant right now. My concern, and I'm sorry if I haven't expressed this properly. My concern is that if we go to any string right now, and then we say, okay, now the spec has changed to be GUIDs, we as the service catalog team are screwed, right? So we have a problem either way we go. And what I think that not being fully spec compliant right now is less bad than being fully spec compliant and then being screwed later.
Aaron, isn't that true of any change to the spec? Like if we're not supporting versioned action, then any spec change that's breaking that...
I missed a lot of what you said, Brennan. Someone was coughing.
Sorry, I'm just saying, the spec is going to be versioning with breaking changes, right? I think that's the point. And I don't think this is unique to this particular thing. Any change to the spec has the potential to cause this issue.
Yeah, that's true. I think if that's the case, then we should probably we should probably take this issue and blow it up in scope to how are we going to support, there's another issue for this. How are we going to support major version spec changes, right? Because we are now talking about that effectively.
So I have a feeling that there are hidden validations in the spec that aren't surfacing. So for example, does anybody truly believe that Cloud Foundry would not would allow you to return a string that contained white space for the ID?
I believe I heard somebody mention that they were serializing several pieces of information into an ID. I don't remember what the exact serialization format was, but I believe it was not a GUID.
So Aaron, I just want to bring up one thing here. I agree with you that if we were to go to a string, going back to a GUID or something more restrictive would be problematic for us, but I believe that's only true once we go to beta. So I would suggest that we possibly table this issue at least until past the next phone call, Open Source Broker API phone call, and get a sense from what's going on there, because I think we can probably force a decision into the service broker spec before we go beta.
I plus one that. I was just going to bring up the same request.
I'm cool with that.
Perhaps we can get a good conversation going there.
So Doug, can you write, there are the two issues with going to just a string that I've heard. I think you know well what the issues are with not going to just a string. But the two issues I have heard for going to just a string are the backward compatibility / spec upgrade situation, and the possible using this thing as a Kubernetes identifier problem.
Yep, okay.
And then also putting down the concerns with not going to just a string. It's just so we can pick up where we left off would be really helpful.
Yep. Okay, I'll try to clean up my notes later.
Awesome, thank you.
In the interest of unblocking Mr. Wilson, can we relax? Can we merge his pull request that allows a dot? I don't think that's a controversial change.
As long as we keep the other one open as a nagging reminder that we need to solve the bigger issue, yeah, that's fine with me anyway.
Okay.
Good.
So next on the agenda is a question from Dan Wilson, who I don't think is present currently, but he's been working on using the HashiCorp Vault service broker with catalog. In fact, that's where he found the issue with the validation on name, and he wanted to know where to put examples. My inclination is toward perhaps linking to them from the wiki for the repo, but I would prefer strongly not to check them in to our repo.
Now, are these examples, are they brokers?
I don't know what form of the example he has in mind.
Okay, because if they are brokers, sorry,
Doug, I've had questions to your question. I have had others ask me in the past, like, is there a list of brokers that work with service catalog? So seems like a wiki would be fine. I would plus one a wiki.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have a problem with the wiki. It's just we have a page over in the Open Source Broker API group with a list of brokers out there. So that's one place for people to put these things. That way they're not Kubernetes specific.
Yeah, Doug
That's
linked
cool.
to that earlier. So, but it'd be good to put more in there. I started my own list, so now I'll go add to that list. But yes.
Maybe in our README we can link to that document, and then if we have a wiki with non-broker examples, Helm charts or something like that.
We should surely do
Put
that.
that
Yes.
there.
I'm sorry, Aaron, can you say that one more time?
So maybe in our README we can link to the OSB document with brokers, and then we can also have our own wiki page with Kubernetes specific examples of whatever kind that the other Doug is thinking of.
Okay.
And we can link to that wiki page as well from our README.
Okay.
Anyone disagree with that?
Who wants the AI to do that?
I can just do it really quick
What is
right after
AI?
this call.
Okay. Yes, Jimmy, it is hard.
You have no idea, Jimmy. I do it all in hex and then I convert it, so it's pretty hard.
Note that you will get the same internet points as a 4,000 line of disstat change for doing that. Okay, so next up is I have been asking myself whether there should be a mode for binding, or I guess service catalog instance credential, where instead of breaking the payload that is returned by the broker into different keys, where you would be able potentially to provide a particular key that the entire credentials blob would just get shoved into. I think the advantage of doing this is that it makes it potentially makes integrations where you want the entire unaltered payload to, for whatever reason, a lot easier. By a lot easier, I mean possible. One that I can think of would be, it seems to me like it would make a resource that did a VCAP services style injection much easier to build. I wonder what people think about this. And I'm muting myself.
So I'm sorry, is this, I'm trying to remember, did you actually open up a formal proposal or a PR or issue that says, here's the way you want to do it? Because I seem to recall something going by about a flag someplace. Is that what you're talking about?
I described that there might be like there will be an API field on the binding spec that controls that behavior, yeah.
Right, okay. So I'm definitely in favor of the idea of allowing that information to get in there somehow. I need to think more about the exact mechanism to do it, but I'm definitely in favor of making that information available. Just a quick question for you. Would it be horrible if we just always created a well-defined key and stuck it in there? That way the person doesn't need to explicitly go out of the way to ask for it?
Yeah, we could have a default key. I think if we did this, we'd probably want the user to be able to specify a particular key if they needed one. But we could definitely have a default.
Yeah, we have already an issue for instance parameters where we want to support both key with blob and map, basically, with separate keys. And I think it's very similar to binding. So possibly, can we make both technical decisions sharing the same types, or at least having similar structure?
Now, can you repeat that one more time? I lost it. I just want to get it right for the notes. Can you say it one more time?
It's actually written like on the next line. So can we use the same structure for both instance and bindings?
This is the opposite, Nal. It's this is when the binding gets. This is about information going into Kubernetes, not coming out as a parameter.
Yeah. I understand. Like, it's just like if you take a look at this issue, and I think it should be the last message in it. And I have provided an example of having a single parameters type with different. Yeah, can you scroll? Yeah. So there is a secret ref, secret key ref, and so on. So like we can do the same for bindings just by saying like if we specify the secret ref, then I'll put everything as a map. and like validate all the like keys to be compliant with environment variables and so far so on. But if you specify secret key ref instead of secret ref, I will put the entire credentials object as a blob into this key, something like that. So I can imagine this type compatible with like both ways of whether we send it in instance input or just put the result of credentials back into Kubernetes.
And if you, on that particular case, if you specified the same secret name in both of those fields, would it be merged?
In that example, you wouldn't be able to set more than one of those pointers.
Yes, correct.
So in your
I'm
example,
fine
you
with
would not
that.
be able to do both?
Sorry, Doug, say that again.
I think it's it's a separate discussion whether we want to support several modes at the same time. I mean, like, yeah.
So Neil, correct me if I'm wrong. So Neil, correct me if I'm wrong. I think last time when we talked about this structure in the context of parameters, we said we're going to start with one or the other and then discuss later how to merge. Do you recall the same?
I haven't actually still watched the previous meeting, so I can't say.
Sorry. Okay.
But
I think that's what we discussed. Maybe someone else remembers better.
so for instance, parameters, which is the next item, I think, I do prefer this kind of structure where every option is exclusive, so you can combine them, because like when there are only two of them, it's like easy probably to do, but once you start supporting like 5, it's like matrix of exponential thing. So
I'm confused on one thing. Why do you guys say you can do one or the other but not both?
So for instance, parameters, it means that not for bindings. For bindings, you can do that, what you say.
Okay.
But for instance, it means that you would have to support merging strategy for 5 types of objects, which is...
So I think there are 2 or 3 different facets here. For the purposes of expedient resolution of the issue that we were talking about, is it okay if we just constrain the scope to just be the mode for binding? It sounds to me like API constructions aside and people's preferences on those, like no one says there's absolutely no way we'd ever need to do this. It sounds like people are open to it. I'm not sure whether that means it's needed for beta. I do think that we should ask ourselves, do we need to do it for beta, or would it be more of a nice to have, or is it something that can just wait till GA and isn't urgent? Can we get a read from folks on that facet of this?
I'd like to at least have the design decision for beta, mainly because I think the design of it could change the way some resources are shaped, and once we go beta, we can't change the shape.
With Neil's schema used for bindings, since it adds another optional field, I don't think that there would be any breakage here.
Yeah, I guess.
But I thought we were saying for bindings. I thought we were saying for bindings, it wouldn't be this union.
Yeah.
Right. For bindings, you would, let's say it's in beta 2 for bindings, then you would omit the existing and add the other one, which is a pure addition, and the default would still be the existing, so there would be no breakage.
Yeah, so union types are useful in this regard because you can add new options for configuring what a new value the union type can take on in a backward compatible way. So what we could do is have a union type of one option, and that way if we decide that we want to add something new in the future, we can do it in a backward compatible way and have it nestled lovingly in the right place in the API.
That may be fine. I mean, that is part of the design discussion that I just want to have. And, you know, if we don't go any further other than saying, putting a comment saying extensions go here, that's fine. But I think we need to have that kind of design discussion before beta.
I think with Neil's proposal, that design, it doesn't implement the union the same way we've implemented them in Service Catalog before.
It does implement the union as it's. I'm actually failing to see or failing to think of where we've implemented them before, except for maybe auth info, which is a single value union.
Right. So we can collapse the two into one and keep the current secret ref as is, or we can do it Neil's way. I don't have a preference, but I do know that either way we go, it will be backward compatible when we adopt the single key binding secret thing.
Yeah, I think the question is maybe more of, do we anticipate other sibling behaviors to the two that we've discussed? I cannot think of one that I would like. I'm listening if anybody has another example.
Well, so I'm still a little confused. I think I understand Niall's proposal, but I still think it's different. And Paul, you try to pull us back around to the use case of where to put the credentials into the secret or how to put them into a secret. And I thought your proposal was changed slightly after what I said about using a default thing, but I thought your proposal was going to be try to take all the keys from the JSON, try to take all the properties from the JSON, stick them as keys inside the secret, but then also have a well-defined key inside the secret. That's the entire JSON blob. I don't think that requires anything special like a union.
I don't think we can do that with the default because you could have a collision between that special key and something in the payload.
Well, that's why there's the optional way. There's an optional flag that says, oh, by the way, if you want to change the default key we use for the entire blob, put it here. But if you don't give us anything, we're going to use, VCAP services.
Yeah, I don't want to shove the entire payload into a secret unless someone specifically asks for that. I don't want to do both the map style and a special key with the entire payload because that sounds like we're basically adding approximately like 50% more storage required for catalog secrets.
Okay.
Twice as
in
much.
That case, So in that case, could we just say there's an optional string that says key name of blob if you want the blob? No property, or you don't put that variable in there. We don't store the blob. You give us a variable name. We stick it in there.
I don't think that's the API that I'd want, but I'd be open to finding the right API to do what you're asking for.
Okay. Because I didn't understand the way to do it versus or via unions. I understand unions for the other use cases we're talking about, like parameters. I didn't understand unions fitting well for this case.
I think that the union analogy for this would be one thing is the map style. Another one would be put everything in a single secret key. Another one would be both map and special key.
I guess I need to see the syntax of it because it sounds like it's awfully complicated.
I can take an action item to write up to write further on what the API would look like.
Okay. Perfect.
I don't think that you assigned that to the Paul that you thought you did.
Really?
I saw Paul Lipton, and I don't know who that is, but that's not me.
Oh, I know who Paul Lipton is, but you're right. There you go. I dismissed the thing.
So Paul, when you write the proposal, you're probably thinking this already. I'll just say it anyway. Can we try to follow the same union syntax that we followed with auth info?
Yes.
And if you want to dump this on me, I'm happy to do it as well.
Well, there are still other union examples like environment variables, source or something like that. So I'm not sure if this is the only way of doing union and we just like blindly should follow this. So yeah, I think we're still open.
Yeah, I agree that there are other ways. Like Neil, I think your way is just as valid, but for consistency's sake, I just feel like we should follow what we already have in our API.
Well, if we care about the consistency and Kubernetes core prefers completely different way of like using unions, then we could probably have to actually change other resources to be consistent, I guess.
I don't think
let's
that we
have that
any...
in the next design meeting.
Yeah. I think we're getting near end of time here, and I think the immediate next thing about parameters is probably not enough. We don't have enough time to discuss that, but we might be able to talk about custom resource definitions if people want to skip to that one.
Is there more to say other than we need to do it?
I think the one question that I saw discussed in Slack is whether we should keep TPR support around after we move to CRDs, and I am a strong no vote on that one.
I think TPRs were ripped out of the code base anyway, right after 1.7 launched.
They're deprecated.
Yeah.
They're going to be removed in 1.9, I think.
So I can speak to why we at Deis at the time wanted TPRs. It was from a use case from a few of our customers that didn't want to have pods speaking to etcd, where etcd was the same etcd that the Kubernetes core was using. Yeah, Deis is dead, so who cares? Now we still have seen the same complaint, but that doesn't necessarily mean we need to use CRDs or TPRs, whatever we want to call them right now.
Aaron, I think the question is actually whether we want to continue the support of TPR once it's ditched from 1.8 to be compatible with the 1.6 of Kubernetes. Because there won't be a CRD support, but still will be a like TPR support in 1.6. Do we want to support TPRs in 1.6? I guess that's the question.
So that was not the, I may have worded the issue wrong. That was not the reason for
No, it's
my
both.
opening the issue.
Yeah, we're discussing both right now.
Yeah, so if we do, Neil, to your question, if we do, then I don't think there's a reason to support anything before 1.7, given that our docs now are all about setting up with the 1.7 aggregator.
Which, by the way, woohoo!
But I remember you wanted to keep the instructions for 1.6, right? For
yeah, I did for people to evaluate, but our primary walkthrough is, I believe now it's for setting up behind the 1.7 aggregator in core.
Okay. Well, it just means that if you have a walkthrough for 1.6, you could probably just say like for 1.6 there is no way other than etcd as a data store, right?
Yeah, that works for me.
Yeah, I think that I don't think that the effort of supporting 1.6 with TPR, which is known to have some fairly fundamental bugs, not in our implementation of storage using it, but just in the mechanism itself, is going to be a good return on investment.
Yeah, I can say definitively that it won't. Being the one
there you have it, folks.
So I would like to, I'll put this on the agenda for next design meeting, which is, yeah, I haven't merged 1.7 yet. I'm working on it, Neil. I'm still reviewing line by line. So just to finish my thought, I would like to have the discussion, I'll put it on for next design meeting, about whether we should move forward with CRDs. And I can present that use case again. I'll remind everyone about what the concern is, et cetera. That's all from me.
Okay, so I think we're about at time. Can I gauge the level of interest in having one of these meetings tomorrow, which is, for the record, Friday?
Oh, hold on just a sec. Aaron, you're going to write up what for the next meeting, just the proposal?
I'll put an agenda item down first for whenever the next design meeting is. And yes, I can write I don't know if I should call it a proposal, but I will write a document that describes why A, we wanted TPRs in the first place, we being Deus, and B, what the continuing use case is for us to want storage, storage besides etcd that the core talks to.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't have one tomorrow, given what's in chat.
So Paul,
I think we should have one tomorrow, and we should make it like 2 hours earlier and require Neil to be there.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Honestly, I'd rather spend that time running some tests on the rebase because I really want to get that one in. I regret that I wasn't able to do my bit in getting that one in this week. I had some personal stuff come up on Monday that basically torpedoed that entire day.
So when's the next call? Tomorrow or Monday? I'm okay with either one.
Sounds like Monday.
Sounds like Monday.
All right.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining. I will upload this meeting tonight to YouTube, and we'll see y'all on Monday. See you later.